name is Katie Gaston. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager with Kuali Build, and today I'm going to go ahead and lead us through the discussion. So before we jump in, a few housekeeping items. All attendees, just so you know, you will be on mute throughout today's presentation. But if you have any questions, go ahead and click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and go ahead and type your questions in throughout today's call. We have, many of you already know, Shannon on the call with us today, and she's going to go ahead and help answer your questions either as you type them, or we'll go ahead and take some time at the end for some Q&A. We've got a content-packed session, including a few polls, so be prepared to give us your feedback on some of the polls. And then just so you know, today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to all attendees and registrants following the webinar. So if you want to hear any information again or review the demo that we're going through, go ahead and expect that you'll receive that in the next day after the webinar completes. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going over our new feature in Kuali Build, Workflow Simulator. Workflow Simulator makes it so easy for anyone in your entire organization who's an app builder to actually test a workflow without having any advanced knowledge of testing best practices. And we'll go through what that means in today's webinar. But before we jump in, I want to ask a little bit of information from all of you about what your state of testing is like today. So with that in mind, give me just a second. I'm going to launch our first poll. I'm curious to know, how long does it take you to test your workflows in your applications today? So go ahead and add your votes as they're coming in. I'll go ahead and make it public once we get a few votes in. About 5 more seconds. We're almost 50% of the attendees have joined. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end polling. Okay, so we've got anywhere between 1 to 8 hours. That's pretty solid. Well done for those in that camp. 3 to 5 days. That's my experience, at least probably a week after I build an app. And at least 2 that are embarrassed to say. I understand, I've been there. So with that in mind, actually, go ahead and you can see we've got 1 to 8 hours, 3 to 5 days, and about 1 to 2 weeks. We're embarrassed to say. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about now why we decided to create Workflow Simulator. And a lot of that has to do with some of the questions you just answered in that poll. We began ideating about Workflow Simulator quite some time ago. With Kuali Build, the idea is that anyone can build and launch apps. And what we kept hearing from you all and what we were seeing is that while we've nailed the building part, one of the most difficult parts of launching an app is being able to test it thoroughly and catch any potential issues. Ultimately, we found testing took time to test notifications. You sometimes had to change to receive the notifications so it didn't confuse people on campus when you were testing things. We found testing could be complex. So if you had to test multiple branches, you had to document different flows and run through multiple simulations and document the results as you went through it. And we found that finding errors can be a little challenging sometimes. So if you weren't really experienced at going through a testing protocol, it was sometimes easy to miss something that might cause some quality of your application to decline when you launch it. Like, for example, an incorrect branch logic, or maybe you miss a field variable in your email notification that you send out. And this was a problem because we wanted build apps to be easy to launch and really ultimately for anyone to be able to build and launch an application. So this led us to the idea of Workflow Simulator. So Workflow Simulator, some of the benefits is that it empowers app builders across campus to simulate a full workflow process from the form submission, various approvals, notifications, and even integrations. The new feature enables you as an application builder to be able to quickly identify and resolve errors, even though you may not have, even errors that you may not have even thought of previously. And in addition, you can actually really easily verify user experiences. So you can simulate logging in as a particular type of user in order to see if the workflow will work as expected and how the form submission will be experienced. And the best part is that, like I mentioned before, Workflow Simulator makes it so literally anyone can actually test a workflow without advanced knowledge of testing best practices. The benefit of this is that it enables more team members to really not only just build an application, but ultimately launch an application quickly. So anyone on your team can really ultimately continue to improve processes. So I'm going to show you a few screenshots of Workflow Simulator, and then we'll dive in and do a demo of what the experience looks like. So first, Workflow Simulator, like I mentioned, lets you really quickly submit forms, and it only highlights the fields that are required for use in the workflow, which makes it really easy for you to quickly know which ones are actually dependent. You can simulate complex workflows. So we have built-in branch logic, where I can test certain routes based upon the logic in that branch. And I can actually see emails and approvals experiences that would go to particular users. Like I mentioned, I can preview the experience of different users. So for example, if I had an email notification going to an anonymous person and it was the submitter, that's going to be a problem because they're anonymous. So I can go ahead and catch some of those issues in advance. And then finally, we've built in some notifications around potential issues you might not have thought of. So for example, if you have a field that is in your workflow, that your workflow is dependent on, but it's not required in the form, that could be a problem if someone's filling out the form. And so we've called out some of those issues as well, so you can make sure that the quality of your application when you launch it is top-notch. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and let me switch one of my screens, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up Kuali Build, and we'll go through a demo. Give me just a second. So you can see I'm in the Kuali Build environment. I'm going to go ahead and look at our travel request app today. So this is an application that someone in a department would fill out if they want to take a vacation or if they're going on to one for a work trip. So let's take a quick look at the form. I have a manager, department. I have some information about the actual trip itself and any additional verification information I wanted to attach. Let's take a quick look at the workflow. So in this workflow process, what's going to happen is I will submit this form. That form would go first to a manager approval. If approved, it would then route to a department approval. Now, most departments work the same, with the exception of our anthropology department, in which case it would go to an administrator, Nora. If those are approved, it gets to another additional approval level at the college dean. Again, if approved, that goes to our finance administrator, Kevin. And then finally, the submitter, once acknowledged and approved, would be notified that their traveler request has been approved, and it would update the main system that we have for tracking information. Now, at any point in this, if something happens and it's denied, the submitter receives a notification of its denial. And again, if approved, they receive a notification at the end. So the first thing, when I'm going to test this workflow, I'm thinking of, okay, I need to test every kind of scenario through the workflow. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the top and I see design or test. I'm going to go ahead and switch my toggle to test. And you can see on the right-hand side of my screen, Workflow Simulator comes up. And I'm going to go ahead and click Run Test. Now what this is showing, so if you look at the left side, you can see exactly which step I am on in the workflow. And the right side is showing what that experience would be for the user. If I look at the top, I see which user is logged in. So currently, Katie, myself, I'm going to go ahead and simulate what this experience is like. But here I could also toggle another person or an anonymous person if I wanted to as well. So let's go ahead and first test what happens if I send it through my basic default route and our department chair denies it. Let's go through that flow first. So I'm going to go ahead and select my manager I know is Iva Glover. Okay. I am in the English department. Now what you can see is, I'm not going to fill this one out because I just don't need to. The yellow highlights which ones are important for this workflow. So In this case, just for testing purposes, I know my return date is going to be the 31st of August. And I also know I need to input a city because it's in the workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Salt Lake City, Utah. I'll submit this, and my next expectation is that it's going to go to my manager. I put my manager as Iva Glover, so I've confirmed here at current user and the email address that Iva is the right person to receive that notice. I can either at this point simulate what Iva's experience would be like in the email, so I could click begin review, or I could go ahead and click next, and I could just move to the next step. We'll do begin review. And here on the review, this looks right, okay. I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And now I'm testing my parallel routes. So you can now see I'm on my branch. This will tell me that I'm currently testing a branch, so that notification comes up. And because of the logic I've input, I'm on my default route. I can see it's default here where it says default up here, and I can see that it's selected as well. I do know that the chair of the English department is Neva, so that's the right person that I have on this. I can verify that's correct. But in this case, let's go ahead and begin review, and I'm testing the denial, so I'm going to go ahead and deny this submission. I'm now on the submitter notification, and I see my travel request has been declined by Iva Glover. That's not correct. Iva Glover was the manager. In this case, Neva was the department chair. So I need to make a note mentally that that's something I have to correct. In which case, I know that I need to do that. I'm going to click next, and my workflow has stopped at that point. So because I think the easiest way when you're testing a workflow is to probably test it, and if you find an error, resolve it, and then go back to testing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to the design mode. I'm going to go ahead and resolve that what I just found. So in this case, I know that it's been declined by Iva. I'm just going to go ahead and move this to declined. I don't know if that individual needs to know exactly who it was declined by because it's at the department level. So if they need to contact someone, they can go ahead and just contact their manager. I'll save that. And I'm going to go ahead and run this workflow again. I'll go back to test, run test. Now, the other thing that I'm noticing as I'm going to submit this is I have these little red issues that come up. So it says potential issue. The field is used in the workflow, but not required in the form. I mentioned that when I was in my presentation. So what I probably should do on this next change round is to go ahead and make sure all of those fields are required as well, just to resolve that issue and make sure that someone who's filling out the form, make sure that all the information we need for the workflow is actually submitted. I'm going to go ahead and actually do that now before I test so I don't forget it. So I'm going to go back to my form, and the fields I need to make required are the submitted by field. I need my manager field. I need my department, return date, and city. All right, good to go. Let's go back to our workflow. Going to move it to test again, run test. You see those little ones disappeared, so I fixed that issue. So now I'm going to go ahead and test my default route if I approved the submission. So we'll go through this again. I'm going to keep everything the same just to make it simple. The department is going to be English. Return date is, we'll just put July 30th, and Salt Lake City, Utah. All right. Submit. I know it's Eva. I'm going to go and begin this review. Everything looks good. I'll approve it. I'm now on my default routes. So I'm going to go ahead and test again. The default one, Neva's still the person we need. Begin review. Everything looks good, and she approves it. So it does tell you once you complete that you're done testing that route, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next. This next approval is the college dean. Now, I expect this dean to be Giovanni, so that is indeed correct. I've got my right person there. I'm going to go ahead and begin the review. This all looks good to me. I'll approve it. And this now goes to our finance person, Kevin. Again, looks good. I don't see any issues, so he's acknowledging it. Travel request has been approved. Enjoy your trip on July 30th. So what I realize this probably would have been more obvious if I put the first date when I was doing my testing. But one thing I realized when I did this is I only had my return date on the notification when I submitted the form. That was the one that said that was required. But in this notification, it's reading, your travel request has been approved. Enjoy your trip on a specific date, and then to Salt Lake City. So ultimately, if I want that right, I probably need to go back and change that notification to make sure that variable is right, because return date doesn't really make sense there. So I'll note something I have to change. So next, I'm going to click next, and now this is our integration step. Now the integration step test allows someone who's more of a technical person to actually, that wants to send data from Build to another software system. This step allows them to preview exactly what information will be sent in any scenario. So to do that, they can go ahead and click the View JSON, and that code will show up that is going to that other system. But if you don't have, if you're not familiar with integrations or that skill set, don't focus on that one too much, but go ahead and I would say bring in someone technical if you need to just validate that that is working as expected. We'll go ahead and click next and finish that submission. So I remembered I needed to update this one, which was the approved notice. Oops. So I'm going to go back to my design. We'll click the approved submitter notice, and I see on that variable I have return date. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to add the variable of departure date instead. Save that. Now, the other thing I should probably do if I'm changing that, because remember how I went back and I made certain fields required and other ones not required? Well, if the form was telling me that field needed to be required, it didn't actually need to be required because it was the wrong field. So I'm going to go back to my form now, and I'm going to switch that and make sure the one that's required is the correct one. So here I'm going to click departure date, make that required, return date, and I'm not going to make that one required, just for this purpose. And let's go ahead and go back to my workflow. So on that test, I just resolved those issues that I found. Now let's go ahead. We've tested default route, both denied and approved. So let's go ahead and do another test. And let's move on now to the route 1, which is the anthropology department. I'm going to go back, click test, and run my test. And we'll keep everything fairly similar, with the exception of this department 1, because again, that's the criteria for my parallel branch. We're going to go on vacation tomorrow. Exciting. And my city is going to be Salt Lake City, Utah. And we'll go ahead and submit that. So again, I expect Iva to get this notification. This again is good. We've already gone through this, no issues. We'll approve it. Going to my parallel routes now. And you can now see I'm on route 1. I can see that here, and I can see it here because I've selected anthropology as the department. I'll begin the review, and I need to make sure this is going to the right person. So Nora is indeed the person that I expected this to go to. We're on the right user there, so I'm good there. And let's go ahead and test denied first, just to kind of keep it how we did the first one. So we'll deny this. Request has been declined by Nora. That looks good. They reach out to their manager, and this goes to the submitter, which was me. So that notification looks good. So we'll click next. We've verified that the denied branch works as expected. So let's start over. We'll run another test, and I'm going to do the same criteria. So we're doing Iva Glover. The department will be anthropology. Departure date, we'll move this one maybe to next week, something to look forward to, maybe in August. And Salt Lake City, Utah. I'll submit this. We've been through this one. We are good to go on IVA's notification. I'm now going to test approval again. So Nora is indeed correct. Let's go ahead and begin review. This looks good to me. Let's go ahead and approve it. It says the route was complete. Now this is going to the dean of the anthropology department. I know, because I know everyone on campus, that that should be Gabriel. And Gabriel is indeed the right person that's selected here. So I'm set. I'm good to go on that. Let's go ahead and click next. And I'll approve that. And we've been through most of this flow already, so I'm not too concerned about it. Kevin is indeed the right person. So next, or begin review, acknowledge. This is going to me as the submitter. We fixed that, so that is now looking good. The integration step, I mentioned what that was, and our workflow is complete. So I'll switch it back to design now. And that's pretty much what I wanted to go through today. We have a little bit of time for questions. In summary, ultimately, like I mentioned at the beginning, we built Workflow Simulator to help you speed up your testing processes so anyone on your team can launch applications faster. So think of a question, and while you're doing that, I'm launching our next poll. Let me go ahead and see. Let me go back to this. Give me a second. Okay, so from what you saw today, what part of Workflow Simulator are you most excited to try out? Have some votes coming in. We've got about 50% of votes calculated. I'll leave it open for 5 more seconds. 2, 1, and I'm ending the polling. Okay, so these are the results. We've got verifying email notifications, completely understand on that one. That takes a lot of time. Prior to Workflow Simulator, that could take a lot of time. And parallel routes. I know if you have a very complex workflow, that can be really difficult. So those two won the race, followed by testing approvals and acknowledgement. Great, thanks for entertaining me on that poll, and good to know that some of you are excited about some of the features that we have coming up with Workflow Simulator. So I'm going to stop sharing results, and do we have any questions that came in? Go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. We'll hang on the line just a little bit more. It doesn't look like we have any open questions yet, so I'll hang on for a few more minutes.
Katie, it looks like we've got a question in the chat from Jill. Can you simulate skipping an acknowledgement since it doesn't stop the workflow?
Can you simulate skipping an acknowledgement since it doesn't stop the workflow? I don't believe that we have that capability today. Though Jill, we will go ahead and I'll validate that with our lead engineer. To just make sure that if indeed I was incorrect about the ability to simulate skipping a particular step in our Workflow Simulator, if that is indeed a feature of it. But at this point, I believe it would still go through the process as if you were to acknowledge it. Thank you for the question. I would say this is the point in the webinar where I need the Jeopardy theme song to help encourage some questions to be asked. So what would happen, we do have a question from our audience, thank you. What would happen if they did submit without a manager? That's an excellent question. So what would end up happening in that particular submission process is that if I went through that and I didn't have a manager field, it would not show an individual that that particular item could be sent to. And we're going to go ahead and answer that in the chat box as well. So if I went through and I didn't have a manager that this would be sent to, that next notification would show that it would not work as expected. Okay. With that in mind, thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you dive in, start testing some workflows, and let us know if you have any other questions, thoughts, or suggestions. Have a nice rest of your morning.